Hey guys, and welcome back to another Q&A. Before we start, I just want to thank everyone who has supported the channel and who has been here for I don't know how long. I remember it was not too long ago this channel had only around 1,000 subscribers, and we're pushing 10,000 subscribers right now, which is insane to me. A couple hundred more, we'll be at 10,000, which blows my mind, quite frankly. I just want to make a few announcements. First of all, once we do reach 10,000 subscribers, make sure to join the Concordia Jedi Discord and join us for the Roast of Concordia Jedi. You get a couple minutes to just vent your frustrations on me, just lay into me, do whatever you want. It's a roast, go for it. Outside of that, we have more content coming soon. I'm working on a new What If scenario, more stuff for Cassius, including more chapters of Clone Wars Chronicles, and stick around for more announcements because there may be some changes coming up soon. Nothing that's going to cause any major issues, but just some scheduling things that I might need to fix up. I may not be as active this coming week as it's my birthday on Monday, so yeah, that's about it. Let's get into these questions. From TDAP1802, how do you come up with characters for your series? Also, how do you come up with names? I've said before, Cassius, I started coming up with the idea for him when I was like 15. That's over 10 years ago. The whole idea came because I just had that idea in my head of like, I want to tell a story set in Star Wars. At that point, it's basically just telling yourself, okay, well, what kind of a character is he? Is he a Jedi? Is he a smuggler? Is he a Sith? What era does this take place in? So it's mainly first asking yourself, like, what story am I telling? And which character will be the main focus? For me, I wanted to tell a story of a Jedi Padawan in the last days of the Republic. And, the other characters kind of came naturally, based on what was needed for the story. He needs a master. Well, we'll create a master for him. I didn't want to have an established character from the series be his master because I wanted to tell something different. I wanted to make a new character for his master. And yeah, the other characters just kind of came naturally. Some of them are, like I said, characters that were conceptually created by, some of my friends, and I wrote their story into the Book of Cassius. As for their names, I thought it was going to be a lot more difficult coming up with names for some of these characters, but the hardest part is just making sure that, their names are unique, that I came up with them, that I didn't just think of a name that turns out, oh, there's actually a character in like the expanded universe or in the series that actually has that same name. So that was kind of tough. But what I did when coming up with the names for Cassius, I was in a theater course in college, and in my mind, the character's name at that point was Escheron, and we were talking about Shakespeare, and I believe we were talking about the Caesar play that was done by Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, and the character in that, Cassius, Cassius, I believe is how it was spelled. But I remember thinking, I like that name, and it sounded kind of Star Warsy to me, so I kind of changed the spelling a little bit. I shortened Escheron to Ershon, and made that the last name, and it became Cassius Ershon, and I really liked that name, so I chose that. For Master Takai, I don't exactly remember how I came up with her name, but I remembered that I liked how it sounded when I put two K's in for the first name with like just the sound it made, and I thought up Kakuri, and I just immediately fell in love with that. And then the last name, I don't remember how I came up with it, but I just liked how it sounded when it all came together. Kakuri Takai. Corbin Roth was the same one. I chose like a name that, is a name that exists in real life. Corbin is an actual name, just like, Luke is. But I, gave it a slightly different spelling. I liked the last name Roth. And yeah, a lot of these characters, it was just kind of finding, vowels and consonants and words that, sounded good together. And that's how I came up with a lot of the names. Thank you for your question. From Diamond360. 1. With Ahsoka out now, what are your overall feelings on the show? Adding into that, what are your feelings on its predecessor, Rebels? So before I talk about Ahsoka, because I did see the first 2 episodes that just came out yesterday, I should talk about my thoughts on Rebels. Rebels, I think, is a fantastic show. The first season, started off kind of slow. Wasn't the biggest fan of it, but as it progressed, kind of like how it did with the Clone Wars, where I wasn't really a big fan of the first 2 seasons, as the show progressed and the story got deeper and more dramatic, I really enjoyed it more and more. And Rebels, I'd put up there with Clone Wars as one of my favorite Star Wars projects that isn't, a movie. It feels in a lot of ways like a continuation of the Clone Wars. Obviously, there's some differences, the art style based more on Ralph McQuarrie's concept art of the original trilogy. But I really did like Rebels. I loved the characters, Kanan, Ezra, Sabine, Hera, Zeb, Chopper, all of them. I loved all the characters. I loved how they incorporated Thrawn. I love how they handled his character. I loved seeing Ahsoka again. The whole Twilight of the Apprentice arc was beautiful. So yeah, I really enjoyed Rebels. And after watching Ahsoka, I'll just say it does start off a little bit slow. And it feels like these first 2 episodes were mainly to kind of get people on the same page, like for people who, didn't watch all of the Clone Wars or Rebels, or people who may not know exactly who Ahsoka is. And I'm fine with that. It feels like now that everything's, kind of caught up to the, where the Rebels epilogue ended, it feels like now we're going to start really pushing the plot forward and seeing some amazing stuff. So I'm very excited. I'm very optimistic about Ahsoka. I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see where it goes next. 2. Not to push story ideas onto you, but what would be your thoughts on continuing stories of Cassie's characters such as Liara or Gaia-Dome told in the ever-expanding New Republic era as spin-offs? I have some ideas for those 2 characters, nothing concrete yet. I've said I want to, leave Liara and Gaia-Dome where they are for right now. I just finished, their roles in the Book of Cassius. And I want to give those characters a little time to breathe. I don't want to jump right back into that era just yet. Number 3. Have you ever been interested in telling stories in other franchises? I know there's an upcoming one set in the Jaws franchise, but do you have any other ideas for other franchises you're a fan of? So that's the thing. Star Wars has always been one of the biggest things in my life. It's always been something I've been very passionate about. I love Star Wars. I've always loved it. Same with Jaws, ever since I saw the movie. That's why I wanted to tell, a single novel, Jaws Red Tide, which I hope to have out next summer. As for other franchises, people know that I also love Lord of the Rings. And the problem with that is people say, are you going to do something like you did for Cassius, but, something for Lord of the Rings? And I have to say, I don't think so. For Lord of the Rings, my writing skill just would not do justice to Tolkien's. Tolkien was an amazing writer who went into so much detail in his work, and not only would it just take me so long, because I'd have to dive into his whole legendarium, I'd have to dive not just into the movies, but also the books and his letters. And while I love researching Tolkien, it just feels like that would be something where my writing skills would not be up to par for telling a story set in Tolkien's world. And I prefer to just leave Tolkien's legendarium as it is. It's already perfect. I had some ideas for something in Harry Potter, but that's up in the air whether or not I'll ever do it. For right now, I'm just going to stick with Star Wars and then with Jaws Red Tide coming next summer. 4. Not to bring up controversial stuff, but how do you handle toxic people in social media, especially within the Star Wars fan base? With the world getting more and more negative, how do you maintain the positivity and handle such people? I don't mean to bring up such stuff, I just truly wanted to know how you handle it. I'm being fully honest here when I say that one of the many reasons I'm a fan of your channel, as well as others such as Star Wars Elseworlds, is the positivity and love for Star Wars you guys bring onto your channel. That's, you pretty much answered your question right there. I see toxic people on social media and in the Star Wars fan base all the time. They're always going to be there. I've accepted that, we're always going to be fighting about something. Star Wars fans, if nothing else, love to argue. They love to fight. They love to be right about their opinions. Your opinions are bad. And that's just something we have to accept. The thing we don't have to accept is that people are just going to be angry and toxic no matter what. The big thing to remember is stay positive. At the end of the day, what really keeps me from going, for lack of a better word, to the dark side, getting into huge rants and arguments and yelling and screaming and being toxic, is remembering that at the end of the day, Star Wars is a fictional series. It's space fantasy. It's not worth getting into arguments with strangers and wasting that time. People are going to argue. That's fine. I argue things I don't like, about things I don't like in Star Wars, but you got to remember, none of it's real. It's fictional. The feelings that it makes us feel, very valid, and it's more than valid for you to argue, I don't like this because I feel yada yada yada. That is completely fine. But if you're going to be toxic, if you're screaming at people, yelling at people about how this character was ruined, or this character doesn't do this character, blah, blah. If you're going to be doing that, you've got to look at yourself and ask, what am I doing right now? Is this worth getting so upset over? And I try to handle these kinds of situations, as civilly as I can. If people are being toxic, and believe me, I get this stuff all the time. I'm a Star Wars fan who enjoys the sequel trilogy. I get this kind of stuff. I like Rey, I like Finn, I like Poe, I like Kylo. I like these characters. I like these movies. I don't think they're perfect, but I enjoy them. Just because of that, just because I enjoy something and like talking about it, I get people who are toxic that come into the comments and just, parrot the same stuff, blah, 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 Rey's, blah, blah. And I'm like, what's the point in arguing with that? What's the point in just shooting back and getting angry? There's no point. There's no point in getting into arguments like that. If someone's being toxic, let them scream by themselves into the void. Just ignore them. If it's someone who's... Now, there's times where I haven't exactly taken that approach. There's times I've made the mistake of getting involved and and I've been toxic in the past. I'm more than willing to admit that, and it was a mistake to do that. Sometimes I lose control, sometimes I get angry. Everyone does. But I try my best to stay positive. I don't want my channel to ever become one of those Star Wars channels that's just, oh, I love talking about this, but I'm absolutely gonna dog on this part of Star Wars and make fun of it. You know why? Because anything I make fun of in Star Wars, something I might absolutely despise or hate, someone else loves that. To someone else out there, that's their favorite thing in Star Wars. I could be up here ragging on my least favorite Star Wars, Attack of the Clones. I could go into detail about how much I dislike that movie, how much I hate the love dialogue, how much I think the CGI hasn't aged well, how much I don't care for the story or the pacing. I could rag on that all day. I could put out a full hour-long editorial about everything I find wrong with Attack of the Clones. Why don't I do that? For one, it's a waste of time, because even though it's my least favorite, I still enjoy watching it from time to time. And also, that's someone's favorite Star Wars movie out there. Someone out there loves Attack of the Clones more than any other Star Wars film. And why would I want to tell them that they're wrong for doing that? Why would I want to hate on them or rag on them? That it's just ridiculous. So, long story short, the way I deal with toxic people is either let them scream at themselves or try to have a civil discussion with them. I try to keep this channel as open and positive as possible. If you love Star Wars, that's your only criteria for being a part of this channel. We all love Star Wars here. Join us, have fun, just remember to be respectful to everyone. Thank you for your questions. From 212th Trooper. 1. If there was something you could bring from Legends into canon, what would it be? That's a tough one, because the thing that I love most about Legends, or the character I love most about Legends, is definitely Kyle Katarn. I love Kyle Katarn. He is one of my favorite Star Wars characters, not just favorite characters from Legends, one of my favorite characters, period. I love Kyle Katarn, so I would love to see Kyle Katarn's story brought into canon. The problem is I don't see a proper way of doing that, especially with how things, lead up to the sequels. Now, if they could find a way to do that and do the character justice, I'd be all for it. But what I'd rather see is Disney do, series set in the expanded universe, set in Legends. Maybe like an animated series set in Legends where you could tell the story of Kyle Katarn. You could, have a disclaimer, this story is, Legends, it's not canon, but you would still be adapting his story and telling it for people who love the character and love his story. I think that would be a great way to appease a lot of fans. If people don't like Luke in The Last Jedi, you could do a Legends series showing him, rebuilding the Jedi Order in Legends. With Jason Solo and Jaina Solo, Tanelka, Mara Jade, Kyle Katarn, Jaden Korr, all this stuff. You could tell those stories while still telling stuff set in canon. So, Kyle Katarn, I would say yes. I would love to see him brought back somehow. Number 2, this one is a curiosity of mine. What do you think of Qui-Gon dying at the age of 60 in Legends compared to the change they made with him in canon, with him instead dying at the age of 48? I honestly prefer him, being 60. The Legends, him being 60 when he dies, because I think it adds a little more credence for how he dies. Qui-Gon, being older and past his prime, it makes more sense that someone as experienced as him would lose to Maul, especially on Naboo after he gets separated from Obi-Wan. I think his age playing a factor in that makes it all the more compelling. So that's my take on it. Thank you for your questions. From Zachary Wagster. Alright, Concordia, these are my questions. In accordance with the new Ahsoka show coming out, what is your general opinion on Grand Admiral Thrawn? Do you find him interesting as a character? Do you think he's overrated? So here's the thing. I like Grand Admiral Thrawn as a character. I think he's very interesting. He's very compelling, but I never really got into, the whole Heir to the Empire story, the Thrawn trilogy that was, released in the 80s and 90s. That just wasn't my Star Wars. That it wasn't what I read. It wasn't what I was into. So, I have read them since then. And I think Thrawn's a very great, very interesting character. I do think in some ways he is a little overrated. People tout him as this genius mastermind, and he is. And he's a very complex character. But it's also, he's also just someone I find, again, this is me personally, I find him a little overrated. I think he's a great character. I don't think he's among the best. And again, that's just my opinion. Then he asks, this one's pretty simple, but I've actually never asked you this. Who is your all-time favorite Star Wars character in Legends or canon? Doesn't matter. I'm going to have to say, overall, Obi-Wan is definitely my favorite. Maybe a basic choice, but I just love Obi-Wan so much. He's, I think, one of my favorite characters in fiction. If we're talking, purely Legends, I would say Kyle Katarn, but let's say overall Obi-Wan, but favorite in Legends, Kyle Katarn. Then he asks, finally, what is your favorite standalone movie? If you're talking favorite standalone movie in Star Wars, I think there's only 2 that aren't part of the whole saga. And out of those 2, I'd say I enjoy Solo a little more than Rogue One, honestly. And I don't know why. I just do. That's just kind of how I feel. But in terms of like favorite standalone movie that's outside of Star Wars, there's a couple that could be up there. Jaws is one of them. And also The Shawshank Redemption. I love Shawshank Redemption. And there's one more that I still find myself watching every once in a while. I love going back to it. And that's the old Disney movie Hidalgo with Viggo Mortensen. I still very much love that movie. And it's a personal favorite of mine. Thank you for your questions. From Midnight212. If there was a non-Star Wars character you would add to the Star Wars universe, who would it be? That's kind of tough. Because there's so many. I think maybe Gandalf from Lord of the Rings he'd fit in really well in the Star Wars universe. Maybe as like a Jedi or some unaligned Force user on the light side. I think that would be pretty cool. From Dangerous Box 666. What is the best and worst thing about each trilogy? Ooh, That's a tough one. Let's see. I'd say let's go in chronological order. And again, remember, these are all just my opinions. I think the best part of the original trilogy is definitely the characters. You know, none of the trilogies match the wonderful, instantly likable characters that the original trilogy gave us. Luke, Han, Leia, Ben Kenobi, R2, C-3PO, Vader. Yeah, you can't match that. So I'd say the best thing from the original trilogy was the characters they gave. The worst thing from the original trilogy, I think, again, that's tough because the original trilogy is almost perfect in my opinion. I guess I'd say the worst part of the original trilogy is, the obvious changes that were made. Like, when we get to, like, Return of the Jedi, Luke or Leia and Luke suddenly being brother and sister, and, the obvious, like, well, what I told you was true from a certain point of view. Things that you could tell were kind of changed, and they kind of just threw in that explanation to say, oh, no, it was kind of planned. I would say that, probably. For the prequels, best thing about the prequels is definitely the world building. The prequels did a fantastic, phenomenal job at building all these new worlds that we visit, making them all, feel tangible, lived in, and, so many of the environments and set pieces from the prequels are just mind-blowing. They still look amazing. You could also say that the lightsaber duels are one of the best things, but that's a minor thing for me. The worst thing about the prequels, by far, the dialogue. Now, granted, sometimes the dialogue in the prequels is brilliant. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes, when you got an actor like Ewan McGregor delivering, less than stellar lines, less than stellar dialogue, but with such conviction and such wonderful acting, you can look past it. But then you've got stuff like the love dialogue in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And so much of the dialogue in the prequels, it's just not how people talk. It's very unnatural and very artificial. I feel Lucas is great when it comes to ideas and story, not so much when it comes to dialogue. So I'd say that's probably the worst thing about the prequels. Now, in terms of the sequels, which again, I enjoy the sequels, I would say the best thing about the sequels for me is probably, I would say, the dynamic between, Rey and Kylo Ren. I love how they work off of each other. And, I might even say, I'd say the acting in the sequels is wonderful. It's like, especially Mark Hamill in The Last Jedi. Say what you will about the character and how they handled him. Mark Hamill gives a phenomenal performance as Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. So I'd say, a lot of the story choices I really enjoy in the sequels, and the acting was always stellar, if you ask me. The worst thing about the sequels, definitely the fact that they did not have a single mind behind it. So a lot of it feels very disjointed. There's a lot of story choices that didn't make a whole lot of sense. But again, that doesn't ruin them for me. Just that they didn't have a plan doesn't mean that the films themselves are bad. At least to me. You might feel differently. So I'd say, those are probably the best and worst things about each trilogy. Thank you for your question. From Ethan Schultz, what characters in Star Wars do you find overrated and underrated? I would say a very underrated character in Star Wars is definitely Kit Fisto. He has his fans. People like Kit Fisto, but no one really talks about him all that much. And if you go back, especially into Legends, he had a really great story arc. He had a lot of really cool things. I've always just loved the character design too. He looks like Cthulhu if he was a Jedi, which is awesome. So I would say Kit Fisto is very underrated, and also he's the only one of the three that went with Windu to fight Palpatine that actually put up somewhat of a fight. He didn't just stand there and let himself get stabbed. I might go back to the last question and say what was the worst thing about each trilogy. That might be one of the worst things about the prequels, is that that whole duel with, Sidious and how he killed the other 3 Jedi that were with Windu. Stupid. I don't care what you say. Oh, he used a Force scream to stun them. No, he didn't. Stop lying. That was just poor directing. Those Jedi were idiots. So, yeah. Mini rant over. Yeah, Kit Fisto I find a very underrated character. Overrated character. See, that's actually a little more tricky to me, because I don't find... a lot of characters people normally point to as overrated, I don't actually see that way. I just see them as popular. There's popular characters. I would say this one's gonna get me some hate. I would say in terms of a character I feel gets more love and more admiration than they deserve, probably Anakin Skywalker. And the main reason is I see videos from people in lore videos talking about how Anakin was one of the greatest, one of the, most perfect Jedi in the Order, and it was just that the Council was holding him back, that they didn't trust him, and that his turn to the dark side was never truly his fault, and that he just made a mistake. People build up Anakin as this great and epic hero, and he was. Anakin was a great Jedi. He was a great fighter. He was extremely powerful in the Force. He was the chosen one. But we can't forget, Anakin did horrible, awful things that cannot be ignored or put on anyone except him. He murdered a village of Tusken Raiders. People might look past that saying, well, they killed his mother and the galaxy doesn't really see Tuskens as sentient beings. Well, look at Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian and try watching that Anakin killing the Sand People scene the same way again. People, he killed the village of Sand People, women, men, children, all of them, wiped them out for what they did to his mother. On top of that, he was constantly breaking the Jedi Code, constantly defying orders from the Council, which then people ask, why didn't the Council just trust Anakin? They should have... No, he gave them no reason to trust him. Anakin was constantly breaking the rules and defying orders. Why would they grant him the rank of Master? He had not shown he was responsible. On top of that, all the stuff he did after he fell to the dark side. Again, murdering children, murdering innocent Jedi who had no idea what was going on, all because he wanted to save Padme. He was willing to sacrifice all those innocent people just so he could save his wife and child. Is that understandable? Sure, I can understand his mindset. Does that make it right? Does that make it justified? Absolutely not. Killed Mace Windu, helped the Empire, helped the Empire come into being. He was helping lead the Empire, killing surviving Jedi, just being a tyrannical overlord. He was not a good person throughout his whole life. And he needs to be held responsible when we talk about him. And people like to say, well, Anakin and Vader were two separate people. No. You can say that personality-wise, they were completely different. That symbolically, when Anakin turned to the dark side, he died and Vader was born. You can say that. At the end of the day, same person, same body, same soul, same memories. They're the same person. When I talk about Anakin, I talk about him as a tragic figure. He was someone who was great, could have been one of the greatest in the galaxy, but he did horrible things, became an awful, awful person, and only ever returned to the light at the last minute. So I think in terms of how we look at characters and how great they are, I think Anakin's probably a little bit overrated, gets a little too much love. And again, that's just me. And again, I'm sorry I keep ranting here, but it's these kind of things that I feel need to be addressed sometimes. From John Viking 69. Pineapple on pizza, yay or nay, Concordia? What will it be? Okay. Pineapple belongs on Hawaiian pizza. Ham and pineapple. It does not belong on any other type of pizza. That is the only pizza where pineapple works. Pineapple does not work on plain pizza, just plain cheese pizza. Pineapple does not work with pepperoni. Pineapple does not work with buffalo chicken. It does not work with anything except ham. Ham and pineapple, I enjoy it. I like it. But pineapple cannot go on any other type of pizza. That's just my stance. I said that very serious, didn't I? I have a lot of conviction for pineapple on pizza. Anyone who says pineapple doesn't belong on pizza, I say you haven't tried the right ham and pineapple. That's all I say. Also, who's your favorite Jedi and why? Again, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Kyle Katarn. Obi-Wan because he's such a well-written character. All the actors who have played him and portrayed him have done a fantastic job. And Kyle Katarn basically because he's the Chuck Norris of Star Wars. You know, I always loved his personality. I loved his voice in the Jedi Knight games. Loved his lightsaber design. Loved his quips. Everything about him. I loved it. Thank you for your questions. Silver Jaguar 134 asks, what is your favorite fictional character in Star... Okay, we just answered that. So yeah, Obi-Wan and Kyle Katarn. From Task Force Mando, who are your top 5 favorite Star Wars... Getting this question a lot. So I'll just list them up. Top 5 characters. You know, Obi-Wan's at the top, then Kyle Katarn. I'll say then Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Count Dooku. And again, my list changes all the time. But yeah, those ones. Please explain what... Oh, I have to show my work now. So you know Obi-Wan and Kyle Katarn, I just explained that. Luke, again, love his story arc, love everything about the character, love his lightsaber. Darth Sidious, again, just acted to perfection by Ian McDiarmid, and Sam Witwer also does a great job voicing them. Just an embodiment of evil. Sometimes it's fun to see a villain who's just unapologetically evil. And as for Dooku, I love him because he's such a complex villain. He's a Sith, he's evil, but he's so different from so many of the other Sith. He's dignified, he's sophisticated, he's elegant. His lightsaber is one of my favorites. So yeah, Dooku is probably at number 5. Thank you for your questions. And I think that'll do it for this What If. Thank you guys for sticking around. Thank you so much for your questions. Be sure to stick around with the channel. We got more content coming soon. And we'll see you next time. Remember, the Force will be with you. Always.